Chapter 15 The Track of a Storm. Paris, 4 days later, Dr. Manet's lodgings and La Force prison. Dr. Manet didn't return until the morning of the 4th day. So much of what had happened in that dreadful time as could be kept from the knowledge of Lucy was so well hidden from her that not until long afterwards, when France and she were far apart, did she know that 1,100 defenseless prisoners, men and women of all ages, had been killed by the people of Paris. She only knew that there had been an attack on the prisons, that all the prisoners had been in danger, and that some had been dragged out by the crowd and murdered. To Mr. Lorry, the doctor explained that the crowd had taken him through scenes of terrible killing to the prison. There he had found self-appointed judges sitting. He had given his name and profession as having been for 18 years a secret and unaccused prisoner in the Bastille. One of the judges had arisen and identified him, and this man was Devarge. He had learned that his son-in-law was among the living prisoners and had begged for his life and liberty. In the first greetings that had been given him as a sufferer under the old system, it had been agreed that Charles Darnay should be brought before the lawless judges and examined. He seemed on the point of being released when the tide in his favor met some unexplained check that the doctor didn't understand, which led to a few words of secret discussion. The man sitting as president had then informed Dr. Manet that the prisoners must stay in prison but would be kept safe. Immediately on a signal, the prisoner was removed to the inside of the prison again, but the doctor had then strongly begged that he be allowed to stay and assure himself that his son-in-law was safe. He had received that permission and had remained until the danger was over. Greater things than the doctor had at that time to face would have been overcome by his determination. He used his position as a doctor so wisely that he was soon the inspection doctor of 3 prisons, among them La Force. He could now assure Lucy that her husband was no longer in a cell on his own, but was with the general body of prisoners. He saw her husband weekly and brought sweet messages to her straight from his lips. Sometimes her husband himself sent a letter to her, though never by the doctor's hand, but she wasn't allowed to write to him, for among the many wild suspicions of plots in the prisons, the wildest of all pointed at emigrants who were known to have made friends or connections abroad. But though the doctor tried hard and never stopped trying to get Charles Darnay set free, or at least to get him brought to trial, the current of events was too strong and fast for him. The new age began. The king was tried, condemned, and beheaded. The republic of liberty, equality, fraternity, or death was declared. The black flag waved night and day. From the great towers of Notre Dame, 300,000 men called to rise against the tyrants of the world rose from all the different parts of France. What private effort could hope to do anything against the tidal wave of year 1 of liberty, a tidal wave rising from below, not falling from above, and with the windows of heaven shut, not open? One dreadful figure became as familiar as if it had been in public view from the beginning of time, the figure of the sharp female, La Guillotine. It was a popular subject of humor. It was the best cure for headaches. It was sure to prevent her turning gray. It gave a special color to the cheek. It was the national shaver which shaved a little too close. Whoever kissed the guillotine looked through a little window and sneezed into the bag. Among these terrors, the doctor walked with a steady head. confident in his power, never doubting that he would save Lucy's husband in the end. Yet the current of the time swept so strong and deep and carried time away so fiercely that Charles had been in prison for 1 year and 3 months. So much more wicked had the revolution become in that December month that the rivers of the south were filled with the bodies of the violently drowned, and prisoners were shot in lines and squares under the southern wintry sun. Still the doctor walked among the terrors with a steady head. No man better known than he in Paris at that time, no man in a stranger situation, silent kind of great help in hospital and prison, using his knowledge equally among murderer and victim. He was a man apart. He wasn't suspected or questioned any more than if he had indeed been recalled to life. 1 year and 3 months. During that time, Lucy was never sure from hour to hour whether the guillotine would strike off her husband's head the next day. Every day through the stony streets, the temporals moved forward heavily, filled with the condemned, lovely girls, bright women, brown-haired, black-haired, and grey, young men, strong men, and old men, gentle-born and peasant-born, all red wine for the guillotine, all brought daily into the light from dark cellars of dreadful prisons, and carried to her through the streets to quench her terrible thirst. Liberty, equality, fraternity or death, the last much of the easiest to give. Oh, guillotine! If the sadness of these terrible things had caused the doctor's daughter to sink into inaction and despair, she would have been like many others, but from the time when she had held the white head of her father in the room in Saint Antoine, she had been true to her duties. She didn't look very different. She had lost her color, and the old expression of her forehead was now always with her. Otherwise, she was still very pretty. Sometimes at night, on kissing her father, she would burst into tears she had held back all day, and would say that he was the only person on whom she could rely. He always answered, "Nothing can happen to him without my knowledge, and I know that I can save him, Lucy." One day, after some weeks had gone by, her father said to her on coming home one evening, "My dear, there is an upper window in the prison which Charles can sometimes reach at 3 in the afternoon, when he can get to it, which depends on many uncertainties and incidents. He might see you in the street. He thinks if you stood in a certain place that I can show you, but you will not be able to see him, my poor child. And even if you could, it would be unsafe for you to make a sign to him. Oh, show me the place, father, and I will go there every day." From that time, in all weathers, she waited there 2 hours. As the clock struck 2, she was there, and at 4 she turned sadly away. When it wasn't too wet or cold for her child to be with her, they went together. At other times she was alone, but she never missed a day. It was the dark and dirty corner of a small winding street. The filthy place where a woodcutter lived was the only house at the end. On the 3rd day of her being there, he noticed her. "Good day, citizeness," he said to her. "Good day, citizen." Everybody now had to speak like this. "Walk in here again, citizeness." "You see me, citizen?" The woodcutter was a little man who had once been a road repairer. He pointed at the prison, and putting his 10 fingers in front of his face to represent bars, he looked through them at her and laughed. "But it's not my business," he said, and went on cutting his wood. In all weathers, in the snow and frost of winter, in the bitter winds of spring, in the hot sunshine of summer, in the rains of autumn, and again in the snow and frost of winter, Lucy passed 2 hours of every day at this place. She learned from her father that her husband saw her. It might be once in 5 or 6 times, it might be 2 or 3 times together, it might be not for a week or 2. It was enough that he could see and did see when the chances came. All this brought her round to the month of December. On a lightly snowing afternoon she arrived at the usual corner. It was a day of some wild rejoicing. She had seen the houses as she came along, decorated with little spears and the red, white and blue of tricolored ribbons, and with the red caps stuck upon them, and the usual words: Republic one and indivisible, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. The miserable shop of the woodcutter was shut, and he wasn't there, which pleased Lucy and left her quite alone. But he wasn't far away, for soon she heard a troubled movement and a shouting coming along, which filled her with despair. A moment afterwards, and a crowd of people came pouring round the corner by the prison wall. In the middle of this crowd was the woodcutter, hand in hand with the vengeance. There couldn't be fewer than 500 people, and they were dancing like 5,000 devils. There was no other music than their own singing. They danced to the popular revolutionary song, keeping a fast and fierce time that was like so many teeth biting all together. At first they were a mere storm of rough red caps and rough woolen rags, but as they filled the place and stopped to dance about Lucy, a dreadful ghost-like figure rose from among them. They came forward, went back, hit one another's hands, held one another's heads, spun round alone, spun round in pairs, until many of them dropped. While those were down, the rest linked hand in hand, and all spun around together. Then the ring broke, and in separate rings of 2 and 4, they turned and turned until they all stopped at once, began again, and then spun round in the opposite direction. Suddenly they stopped again, paused, struck out the time afresh, formed into lines the width of the public way, and with their heads low down and their hands high up, they swooped like birds and went off with a scream. This was a dance known as the Carmagnole. As it passed, leaving Lucy frightened in the doorway of the woodcutter's house, the feathery snow fell as quickly and lay as white and soft as if it had never been. Oh, father, for he stood before her when she lifted up her eyes, such a cruel, bad sight. I know, my dear, I know. I have seen it many times. Don't be frightened. Not one of them would harm you. I am not frightened for myself, my father, but when I think of my husband at the mercy of these people, we will set him above their mercies very soon. I left him climbing to the window, and I came to tell you there is no one here to see. You may kiss your hand towards that high sloping roof. I do so, father, and I send my soul with it. A footstep in the snow, Madame de Varges. I salute you, citizeness. From the doctor, I salute you, citizen. From Madame de Varges. This in passing, nothing more. Madame de Varges gone like a shadow over a white road. Give me your arm, my love. Pass from here with an air of cheerfulness and courage for his sake. They left the place. That was well done. It shall not be in vain. Charles is to appear before the judges tomorrow. Tomorrow? There is no time to lose. I am well prepared, but there are precautions to be taken that couldn't be taken until he was ordered to appear before the judges. You are not afraid? She could hardly answer. I trust in you. Do so. Your waiting is nearly ended. My darling, he shall be restored to you within a few hours. I have surrounded him with every protection. I must see Laurie. He stopped. There was a heavy lumbering of wheels within hearing. They both knew what it meant. 1, 2, 3. 3 tumbrils making their way with their condemned souls over the hushing snow. I must see Laurie, the doctor repeated, turning her to face another way. The old gentleman was still at the bank, had never left it. A dark red and yellow sky and a rising mist from the river Seine announced the approach of darkness. It was almost dark when they arrived at the bank. Who could that be with Mr. Laurie, the owner of the riding coat, upon the chair, who must not be seen? From whom did he come out, ill at ease and surprised, to take his favorite in his arms? To whom did he appear to repeat her trembling words when raising his voice and turning his head towards the door of the room from which he had come? He said, "Ordered to appear before the judges tomorrow?" The dreadful 5 judges and determined jury sat every day. Their lists went out every morning and were read out by the jailers of the various prisons to their prisoners. The standard jailer's joke was, "Come out and listen to the evening paper, you inside there." Charles Evermond called Darnay. So at last began the evening paper at La Force. The passage to the place of judgment was short and dark. The night in its cells full of rats was long and cold. The next day 15 prisoners appeared before the judges before Darnay's name was called. All 15 were condemned, and the trials of all of them lasted just an hour and a half. Charles Evermond called Darnay at length appeared. His judges sat in feathered caps, but others wore the rough red cap with the red, white, and blue tricolored ribbons. Looking at the jury and the people watching, he might have thought that the usual order of things was turned upside down, and that the criminals were trying the honest men. The lowest, cruelest, and worst people of the city were there, noisily making comments, applauding, disapproving, anticipating the result without any check. Of the men, the greater part were armed in various ways. Of the women, some wore knives, some ate and drank as they looked on, and many knitted. Among these was one with a spare piece of knitting under her arm as she worked. She was in the front row by the side of a man he hadn't seen since his arrival at the barrier, but whom he remembered as Duvarge. What he most noticed in the 2 figures was that although they were as close to him as they could be, they never looked towards him. They seemed to be waiting for something. They looked at the jury and at nothing else. Under the president sat Dr. Manet in his usual quiet dress, as well as the prisoner could see. He and Mr. Laurie were the only men there who wore their usual clothes and hadn't put on the rough clothes on the Carmagnole. Charles Evermond, called Darnay, was accused by the public prosecutor of being an emigrant whose life was owed to the Republic, because all emigrants were banished on pain of death. It was nothing that the order carried a date after his return to France. There he was, and there was the order. He had been taken in France, and his head was demanded. "Take off his head," cried the people in the room. An enemy to the Republic, the president rang his bell to silence those cries and asked the prisoner whether it was true that he had lived many years in England. Undoubtedly it was. Was he not an emigrant then? What did he call himself? Not an emigrant, he hoped, within the meaning and spirit of the law. Why not? The president wanted to know. Because he had freely given up his title, which he didn't like, and had left his country before the word emigrant was used in its present way, to live by his own. To live by his own hard work in England rather than on the backs of the people of France. What proof had he of this? He handed in the names of 2 witnesses, Theophile Gabel and Alexander Manet, but he had married in England, the president reminded him. True, but not an English woman, a citizeness of France, yes, by birth. Her name and family, Lucy Manet, only daughter of Dr. Manet, the good doctor who sits there. This answer had a happy effect on the people in the room. Cries of praise for the well-known good doctor went up. So changeable were the people that tears immediately rolled down the cheeks of several fierce faces that moments before were looking hard and sternly at the prisoner. On these few steps of his dangerous way, Charles Darnay had set his foot, following Dr. Manet's instructions. The same careful advice directed every step that lay before him. The president asked him why he had returned to France when he did, and not sooner. He hadn't returned sooner, he replied, simply because he had no means of living in France, save that which he had given up. While in England he lived by teaching the French language and literature. He had returned when he did because of the letter he had received begging him to do so. This letter came from a French citizen whose life was apparently in danger because of his absence. He had come back to save a citizen's life and to bear witness to the truth at whatever personal risk. Was that a crime against the Republic? The people cried enthusiastically, no, and the president rang his bell to quieten them, which it didn't, because they continued to cry no until they stopped of their own will. The president asked for the name of the citizen. The accused explained that the citizen was his first witness. He also mentioned with confidence the citizen's letter which had been taken from him at the barrier, but which he didn't doubt would be found among the papers. Then before the president, the doctor had taken care that it should be there, and it was produced and read. Citizen Gabel was called to confirm it and did so. Citizen Gabel had been set free just 3 days before. Dr. Manet was questioned next. His personal popularity and the clearness of his answers made a great impression. He showed that the accused was his first friend on his release from his long imprisonment, that the accused had remained in England always faithful and devoted to his daughter and himself, and that far from being in favor with the government there, he had been tried for his life by it as the enemy of England. As he explained all this, the jury and the people became one. The jury declared that they had heard enough and that they were ready with their votes, if the president was content to receive them. At every vote, the jury voted aloud and individually. The people shouted and applauded. All the voices were in the prisoner's favor, and the president declared him free. When Darnay and Dr. Manet came outside, there was a great crowd in which there seemed to be every face they had seen in the court except 2. They put Darnay into a great chair and carried him home in triumph. As he held Lucy to his heart and their lips came together, a few of the people began dancing. Instantly all the rest began dancing, and the courtyard overflowed with the Carmagnole. Then they put a young woman from the crowd into the empty chair to be the goddess of liberty, and then overflowing out into the neighboring street, along the river bank, and over the bridge. The Carmagnole occupied everyone, and they danced away.